The cottage looked smaller with every passing season, as if grief itself had pressed it down into the soil. Clara stood in the doorway, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the early morning chill. She stared at the horizon, where the sun broke over the plains, and felt the familiar heaviness in her chest. Her husband had been gone for nearly 2 years, taken suddenly by fever that neither prayer nor doctor could drive out. In his absence, the farm had fallen into disrepair. The fences sagged, the barn roof leaked when it rained, and the fields yielded less each harvest. The only thing that seemed to grow steadily was the weight of debt. The banker, Mr. Garrison, had been patient at first. He'd come to her door with sympathetic tones, speaking softly of time and understanding, but patience had soured into sharpness, and sharpness into threats. His last visit ended with him pointing to the land beneath her feet and saying coldly, "You'll be out by winter if you don't pay up." Her children had heard him. Clara had seen the way her son Samuel's face paled, how little Ruth clung to her skirts. She tried to soothe them, tried to tell them all would be well, but the lies scratched her throat like thorns. Everywhere she went, the whispers followed. At church, behind her pew, women murmured that she should remarry quickly or risk dragging her children into poverty. At the well, neighbors gossiped that she owed too much and was fast becoming a burden on the whole town. The words reached her ears like poisoned arrows, and though she held her head high, her heart bent lower with each passing day. That morning, Clara folded her husband's old coat and pressed it to her chest. It still smelled faintly of tobacco and cedarwood, though the scent was fading. She whispered a prayer to him, asking for strength, asking for guidance, asking for anything that could keep her children fed and safe. When Samuel entered the kitchen, his face was set in a determination far too heavy for a boy of 10. "Ma," he said, "I'll quit school and work at the stables. Mr. Pritchard said he might take me." Clara's heart clenched. "No, Samuel. You'll stay in school. Your pa wanted more for you than a life of mucking stalls. But we can't eat books," he said softly. And though he tried to sound grown, his lip trembled like the child he still was. Before she could answer, little Ruth padded in barefoot, carrying a cracked doll in her arms. She looked up at Clara with eyes far too wide for her tiny face. "Mama, are we going to lose our house?" Clara knelt down, pulling both children to her chest. "No, love. Not if I can help it." But the words tasted like ashdot by midday. Clara resolved to walk into town, though dread clawed at her belly. She carried only a small pouch with a few coins, barely enough for bread and her pride, which was fraying like worn fabric. She kept her eyes down as she entered the trading post, ignoring the curious stares. The baker's wife, Mrs. Fuller, greeted her with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Back again, Clara? Still running that tab, I expect?" Heat rose to Clara's cheeks. She placed her coins on the counter, the sound of them pitiful against the wood. "Just a loaf, please." A man leaning against the wall snickered. "A burden, that one. Always owing, never paying proper." Another voice joined in. "Best thing for her would be to find a man willing to carry her weight. Can't expect charity forever." Clara's hand shook as she clutched the loaf, but she said nothing. To speak would only fan their cruelty. She turned quickly, wishing only to escape before the tears broke free, and that was when she noticed him. Standing near the door was Tall Elk, the Apache rancher who sometimes came into town to trade. Broad-shouldered, with long black hair bound at the nape, his dark eyes were steady, watchful. He hadn't spoken, hadn't mocked, hadn't looked at her with pity. He simply observed, silent as stone. While the others jeered, Clara dropped her gaze and hurried past, clutching the bread to her chest. Yet even as she stepped into the street, she felt the weight of that gaze linger quiet, unreadable, and somehow different from the rest. Back at her cottage, Clara tore the bread in half for her children, saving only a crust for herself. She sat quietly, staring at the cracks in the wall, and felt the despair pressing down again. The whispers of burden echoed in her ears, but she also remembered the silent eyes of the Apache at the door. And for the first time in weeks, she wondered if perhaps not everyone saw her as worthless. The trading post was always a place of noise boots on the wooden floors, voices haggling over prices, laughter ringing sharp from men with money in their pockets. But to Clara, stepping inside felt like walking into a pit where every eye turned to weigh her worth. Every whisper sharpened itself against her back. She had come for flour, though she barely had the coin for it. A small pouch dangled at her wrist, light as feathers, holding the last of what she and her children could scrape together. Her hope was foolish. She knew that Mr. Briggs, the storekeeper, might extend her credit again, or that the few coins would at least be enough to get them through another weak dot as she entered. The bell above the door jingled, drawing the gaze of several townsfolk who lingered near the counter. Their voices dipped lower, but not low enough to hide their words. There she is, the widow who owes half the county, still clinging on like a barnacle. Some folk don't know when they're beat. Clara kept her head down, clutching Ruth's hand tightly. Her daughter's little steps pattered nervously beside her. Samuel had begged to stay home, embarrassed to trail after his mother where the town's scorn was loudest, and she had let him. She couldn't bear to see the shame on his face. Mr. Briggs gave her a curt nod when she approached. "What'll it be today?" His tone carried no warmth, no trace of the pity he used to offer in hushed tones when her grief was still fresh. Clara swallowed. "Just a small sack of flour, please. I can pay part now." She set the coins on the counter, 3 dull pieces that barely made. Clink. Mr. Briggs eyed the money, then her. "That won't cover half. Mrs. Walker, you still owe me mere $6 from last month's goods." The silence in the room thickened. Clara could feel the townsfolk edging closer like vultures scenting blood. One man chuckled. "She ought to work it off, I say. A woman with 2 good hands can scrub floors well enough." Another leaned against a barrel, his voice loud and cutting. "Or better yet, find herself a husband. That's what women do when they can't manage. Ain't no shame in it, though, waiting this long. I reckon the only men left would be desperate or blind." Laughter rippled through the room. Clara's cheeks burned. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floorboards and never climb out again. Ruth pressed closer to her skirts, whispering, "Mama, can we go home?" Clara smoothed her daughter's hair with trembling fingers. "Just a moment, love." She looked back at Mr. Briggs, her voice quivering. "Please, just the flour. The children need bread. I'll find a way to pay the rest." Mr. Briggs hesitated, then slid the sack across the counter. "This is the last time," he muttered. "Next week you bring full payment or you don't come at all." Clara clutched the sack to her chest, nodding quickly. "Thank you." She turned to leave, but another voice cut through the airlow, mocking. "A burden. That's what she is. Always taking, never giving. How long before she comes knocking on our doors begging?" The words hit harder than a slap. Clara stumbled, nearly dropping the flour. The laughter that followed clawed at her ears, each chuckle a reminder of her failure, and then the laughter stopped. The air shifted, quieting as a presence near the door grew impossible to ignore. Clara glanced up and froze. Tall Elk stood there, leaning against the frame with the stillness of a man carved from stone. His dark eyes swept over the room, not hurried, not uncertain, but deliberate. He didn't speak, yet the silence he carried pressed heavier than all the townsfolk's jeers. One by one, the men who had laughed looked away. Boots scuffed nervously on the floorboards. A woman busied herself with a basket of goods, pretending not to notice. Clara felt the breath catch in her throat. The Apache rancher was not a stranger. She had seen him ride through town before. had heard the mutters about him owning more land and horses than most white men dared to dream of. He rarely spoke, rarely lingered. And yet now his gaze was fixed not on the others but on her. She dropped her eyes quickly, heat flooding her cheeks again. The sack of flour seemed to weigh 10 times heavier in her arms. All she wanted was to flee. Gathering Ruth by the hand, Clara walked swiftly to the door. As she passed Tall Elk, she dared a brief glance upward. His expression did not soften, but his eyes held no mockery, no pity, only a quiet, steady WATCHFULNESS. Outside, the sunlight felt blinding. Clara's chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths as she guided Ruth down the street. Behind her, she imagined the townsfolk returning to their laughter once the door shut. But one image stayed with her stronger than their cruelty: the still, unreadable gaze of the Apache who had silenced a room without saying a word. For the first time in months, Clara wondered if perhaps she had been seen not as a burden, not as a failure, but as something else entirely. The next morning, Clara rose before dawn, her body aching from a restless night. Though she had managed to secure the sack of flour, the humiliation of the trading post clung to her like smoke. Each whisper, each cruel laugh replayed in her mind until her eyes stung with tears. She hid it from Samuel and Ruth, forcing a smile as she baked a thin loaf from the flour and shared it among them. But inside, she wondered how much longer she could keep holding everything together. By midday, she took a small basket of mended linens to the line to dry. The air was sharp with the scent of sagebrush, the sky a wide, unbroken blue. As she pinned the last shirt, a sound broke the quiet, the steady rhythm of hooves approaching. Her heart leapt into her throat. Few came out this far unless they had business. She expected to see Mr. Garrison, the banker, come to press his threats again. Instead, she froze when she saw the tall figure riding toward her. Tall Elk. He sat astride a powerful chestnut horse, the animal's mane glinting like copper in the sun. His posture was straight, his movements calm, but his presence carried the weight of command. Clara's fingers tightened on the basket as he drew near, stopping just short of her fence. "Mrs. Walker," he said, his voice low but firm, with the cadence of someone who measured words carefully. Clara blinked, startled that he even knew her name. "Yes?" she asked, her tone wary. He studied her face a moment, then glanced toward the sagging roof of the barn, the thin laundry on the line, the small children peering timidly from the doorway. His eyes came back to hers. "I have work. You need coin." The directness of it made her stiffen. Pride flared, fragile though it was. "I can manage," she said quickly, though even as the words left her lips, she knew they were hollow. Tall Elk tilted his head slightly, unimpressed. "The town laughs at you, but I do not. A woman who keeps her children fed, even with nothing, is strong." Clara's cheeks flushed hot. She looked away, embarrassed that he had witnessed her humiliation at the trading post. I don't want pity." "No pity," he said simply. "Trade. You work for me." "I pay," she frowned, uncertain. "What kind of work?" "I have horses," he said. "Many. They need tending. My daughters need clothes mended. My home needs hands to clean." "You can do these things," Clara hesitated. The offer was honest, but it frightened her too. The town already whispered about her being a burden. What would they say if she went to work for an Apache? Her children would be mocked, perhaps worse. As if sensing her thoughts, Tall Elk added, "I do not care what they say." "Do you?" The question cut deep. Clara thought of Samuel's determined face, Ruth's wide, frightened eyes. She thought of the empty pantry and the banker's threats. Her pride screamed to refuse, but her heart knew the truth: her children could not eat. Pride. Her voice shook when she answered, I don't care. Not anymore." For the first time, something like approval flickered in his eyes. He reached into a leather pouch at his side and pulled out a silver coin which glinted brightly in the sun. He extended it to her. "Tomorrow," he said, "come after sunrise. Bring your children if you wish. You will work. I will pay." Clara stared at the coin, her hands trembling. No one had offered her work before, not real work, only scraps of charity dressed as favors. This felt different. This was not a handout. It was a handhold. Slowly, she took the coin, her fingertips brushing his calloused palm. The contact startled her, and she pulled back quickly, clutching the silver to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, though her pride made the words feel heavy. Tall Elk gave a single nod. "Be ready," he said. Then he turned his horse, guiding it smoothly down the path until both rider and animal disappeared into the horizon. For a long moment, Clara stood frozen, the coin burning warm in her hand. When she turned back toward the house, she found Samuel and Ruth still watching from the doorway. Samuel's brows furrowed. "Was that the Apache?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," Clara said softly. "What did he want?" She looked down at the coin, then back at her children. A small, shaky smile touched her lips. "He offered us a chance." Samuel's eyes widened. Ruth tilted her head curiously, and for the first time in months, Clara felt something stir inside her chest, something that might have been hope. The first week of work at Tall Elk's ranch passed more swiftly than Clara expected. She found herself mending garments by the firelight in his great room, scrubbing wooden floors until they gleamed, and sewing simple dresses for his two young daughters, Morning Star and Little Willow. To her surprise, the girls had taken to Ruth almost instantly, giggling as they played with her ragged doll, while Samuel spent hours trailing behind Tall Elk, watching as he worked the horses. Each evening, Clara carried her wages home, small but steady, enough to fill the pantry and put bread on the table. For the first time in months, her children went to bed with full stomachs and smiles on their faces. And though the townsfolk still whispered when she walked through the square, Clara began to care less. Let them talk. She was working. She was providing. But comfort, she learned quickly, was fragile. It was on a bright morning, when the sky was streaked with pale clouds and Clara was hanging a line of freshly washed linens, that the sound of hooves shattered her peace. She looked up, expecting to see Tall Elk returning from the pasture. Instead, 3 riders approached, men she knew all too well. At the front was Mr. Garrison, the banker, his hat tilted low against the sun. Behind him rode 2 of his hired hands, burly men with eyes as sharp as knives. Clara's breath caught. Her hands froze on the wet sheet. "No," she whispered. "Not here. Not now." Samuel and Ruth, who had been gathering firewood nearby, ran to her side. Samuel stiffened when he saw the riders, his jaw tightening. Ruth clung to her mother's skirt, eyes wide with fear. The men dismounted, their boots crunching against the dry earth. Garrison tipped his hat, though the gesture carried no courtesy. "Mrs. Walker," he drawled. "Heard you've been earning wages out here. Thought it time we collected what's due." Clara swallowed hard, forcing strength into her voice. "I don't have enough yet. Please give me time. I'm working now. I can pay." Garrison's smile was cold. "Time's the one thing you don't have. Your debts have only grown. And if you can't pay with coin—" His eyes flicked toward Samuel and Ruth, lingering far too long. "Well, there are other ways to settle accounts. A boy strong enough to work. A girl who can serve in a household." Clara's knees nearly buckled. She pulled her children behind her, her arms wrapping around them protectively. "No," the word tore from her throat, raw and desperate. "You'll not take them from me." One of the hired men sneered. "Debt's debt, ma'am." "You signed the papers." Clara's vision blurred with tears. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "They're all I have." "I'll do anything, just don't take my children." The banker stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "Then pay." Before Clara could answer, a new voice cut through the air, low, commanding, like the rumble of distant thunder. She said no. The men turned sharply. From the path beyond the fence, Tall Elk approached, his stride unhurried but unyielding. He carried no weapon in his hands, yet his presence alone radiated power. His dark eyes narrowed as they fixed on Garrison and his men. "This is my land," Tall Elk said. "You bring your threats here. You insult me." One of the hired men spat. "Stay out of it, Apache." "This is between her and the bank." Tall Elk's gaze hardened. "You stand on my ground." "That makes it my business." The air grew tense, the silence broken only by the restless snort of the horses tied nearby. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to cry out, to tell Tall Elk not to risk himself for her, but her voice had vanished. Garrison's smile faltered, but he tried to recover. "We'll be back," he warned, adjusting his hat. "And if she hasn't paid, we'll take what's owed one way or another." Tall Elk stepped forward, closing the distance until he towered over the banker. "Come again," he said, his tone sharp as steel, "and you will answer to me." The threat was quiet, but it carried the weight of promise. Garrison's men shifted uneasily, their bravado shrinking beneath Tall Elk's unwavering stare. At last, the banker pulled back. "Mount up," he barked to his men. Within moments, the three were on their horses again, riding off in a cloud of dust. Clara stood trembling, her children clutching her tightly. Relief flooded her body, but it was laced with shame. Shame that her debts had followed her here. Shame that her weakness had forced Tall Elk into confrontation. When she finally found her voice, it cracked. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door." Tall Elk turned his gaze on her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he spoke. "You did not bring trouble," he said quietly. "The trouble was already theirs, not yours." His words struck deep, though Clara could not believe them. She lowered her eyes, tears burning hot. She had wanted to stand strong, to prove she was more than a burden. Yet once again, it was another's strength that had shielded her. After the confrontation with Mr. Garrison and his men, the air around Clara seemed different. The memory of Tall Elk standing between her children and danger lingered in her mind. Though his words had been few, his presence had been immovable, like a great oak that refused to bow before the storm. And yet, instead of easing her worries, the moment left Clara shaken. She lay awake that night, staring at the low rafters of her cottage, guilt weighing heavy on her chest. "I've dragged him into my troubles," she thought. "I've brought shame to his door. What kind of woman am I, needing others to protect me again and again?" The next morning, she arrived at Tall Elk's ranch with her children as usual. She kept her eyes low, afraid of what she might see in his gaze: frustration, perhaps, or regret for involving himself in her troubles. But Tall Elk said nothing of the men. He merely handed her a basket of mending and went about his work. It was Samuel who broke the silence later that day. He had followed Tall Elk to the corral, watching with keen eyes as the man worked a restless stallion. Clara looked on from the porch, her hands busy with sewing, while Ruth and the Apache girls plucked wildflowers nearby. "Why doesn't he just whip it?" Samuel asked boldly when the stallion bucked against the rope. Tall Elk did not glance at the boy, though his voice carried across the paddock. "Whip breaks spirit. Broken horse runs, but it does not trust. Trust makes horse stronger." Samuel frowned, but he kept watching, his young face absorbing every movement. Clara felt her throat tighten. Her husband had never had time to teach Samuel much about horses, and here was Tall Elk offering wisdom without sermon or lecture, just steady action. Later, when the stallion calmed beneath Tall Elk's touch, Samuel's eyes lit with a mix of awe and hunger. Clara recognized that look. It was the look of a boy longing for a guide, someone to show him how to stand tall in a world that too often mocked weakness. That evening, as the sun sank low, Clara lingered by the fire with her needle and thread. Tall Elk's coat lay across her lap, the seams frayed from hard use. She ran her fingers over the leather, stitching slowly, carefully. He entered quietly, pausing at the sight of her work. "You do well," he said. She glanced up, startled, then lowered her eyes again. "It's nothing. Just mending. Nothing keeps a man warm," Tall Elk replied, his mouth curving ever so slightly, almost like the ghost of a smile. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She bent her head lower over the stitching, feeling the warmth rise to her cheeks. It was in the small moments like these that a strange, fragile bond began to form between them. Not in grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but in the quiet rhythm of daily life. Clara noticed the way Tall Elk guided Ruth and his own daughters with equal gentleness, teaching them how to weave simple braids from horsehair. She saw the way his hands, so capable of strength, could coax a skittish foal to stillness with nothing more than patience. She heard the way his voice softened when Samuel asked questions, never dismissing the boy's curiosity, and in turn, Tall Elk seemed to notice her. When her hands trembled from exhaustion, he brought her a cup of strong coffee without a word. When the sun was too harsh, he shifted the work so she could sit in the shade. He never spoke of her debts, never reminded her of the day at the trading post, never called her a burden. Instead, he treated her as though she had worth, simple, unquestioned worth. One evening, Clara finished her work late after the children had already dozed by the fire. She rose to leave, gathering Ruth and Samuel, when Tall Elk's voice stopped her. "You carry much," he said quietly. Clara stiffened, her back to him. "I carry what I must." There was a pause. Then, "You carry more than most men I know. Do not think yourself weak." Her throat closed. The words she had so desperately longed to hear, and yet they unraveled her completely. She blinked against the sting in her eyes, whispering, "You don't know me." Tall Elk's answer came steady and calm. "I see enough." For a long time after, Clara lay awake in her bed, staring at the cracked ceiling. His words echoed again and again, burrowing deep into the part of her heart that had been hollow since her husband's death. "I see enough, God." It was not love yet. It was not even trust. But it was the beginning of something she had thought forever lost: dignity, respect, and the faintest glimmer of hope that perhaps she was not destined to carry her burdens alone. The summer sun had begun to fade into the copper haze of autumn when the letter arrived. Clara found it folded neatly under a stone on her doorstep, its paper stamped with the seal of the county bank. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, already dreading what it contained. Inside, the words were as sharp as knives: foreclosure notice. Property seized for unpaid debts. Vacate immediately. Clara sank onto the porch step, the paper fluttering in her lap. For weeks she had worked at Tall Elk's ranch, stretching every coin to cover food, mending until her fingers blistered, scrubbing until her back ached. She had begun to believe she might claw her way out of the pit. But this was the end. The cottage, her husband's cottage, was no longer theirs. "Ma?" Samuel's voice came from the doorway. He was holding a bundle of firewood, his brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" Clara tried to speak, but her throat locked. Ruth appeared beside her brother, clutching her doll by its frayed arm. They looked at her with wide, searching eyes, and something inside Clara broke. She pressed the paper into her lap and covered her face with her hands. The tears came hot, unstoppable. "I failed you," she whispered, rocking slightly. "I failed us all." Samuel dropped the wood with a heavy thud and crouched beside her, his small hand gripping her shoulder. "No, Mama, you're doing everything you can. They're taking our home." Clara's voice cracked. raw with despair. "The place your father built with his hands. The place we lived together, it's gone." Ruth whimpered and burrowed into her mother's lap. Samuel clenched his jaw, trying to look strong, but Clara saw the fear in his eyes. That evening, word spread quickly through town. By morning, the whispers had grown into a chorus. Clara felt them pressing against her wherever she went, the cruel, satisfied voices of those who had predicted her fall. "She's lost everything now. Told you she was a burden. Best thing would be for her to leave. Folks like her only drag everyone else down." Clara walked through the market square with her head bowed, clutching Ruth's hand, Samuel trailing silently behind. Every whisper felt like a lash across her skin. By the time she reached Tall Elk's ranch later that day, she was hollow, her pride stripped bare. Tall Elk met her at the corral, where he was brushing down one of his mares. He paused when he saw her, noting the slump in her shoulders, the exhaustion etched into her face. "You have news," he said. Not a question, simply a statement. Clara tried to hold herself steady, but the words tumbled out broken. "They've taken it. The cottage. Everything. I have nothing left." Her voice cracked, and the tears she had fought all morning spilled over. She hated herself for crying in front of him, for looking weaker than she already felt. Tall Elk set down the brush and stepped closer, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his dark eyes steady. "You have your children," he said at last. Clara shook her head, covering her face. "And what kind of mother am I, dragging them from place to place with no roof, no land, no future? The whole town was right. I'm nothing but a burden. A woman too weak to hold on to what little she had." Silence followed her outburst, heavy and suffocating. Clara lowered her hands, ashamed of her own words. She expected him to agree, to say what everyone else had said, that she was useless, a failure. Instead, Tall Elk spoke quietly, his tone like a steady drumbeat. "A burden does not rise every morning to work. A burden does not starve herself so her children can eat. A burden does not stand in the fire of shame and still keep walking." Clara blinked at him through her tears. Stunned. "You are not a burden," he continued. "You are a woman carrying more than any should carry. And still you stand." The words wrapped around her like a cloak, warming the raw, cold edges of her heart. Yet she could not believe them fully, not yet. The loss of her home still crushed her chest, still whispered of failure. She turned her face away, unable to hold his gaze. That night, when she returned to her now emptied cottage, she sat on the bare floor with Samuel and Ruth curled against her. The silence of the house was deafening. Each creak of the boards seemed to mourn with her. She whispered into the dark, to her children, to herself, to the husband who could no longer answer, "I don't know how much more I can lose." And though she could not yet see it, the moment of her deepest despair was already the threshold of something she never expected, something Tall Elk had quietly prepared for her. The morning after the notice, Clara rose before dawn, though she had barely slept. The air was sharp with the coming of autumn, the chill creeping into her bones. She sat on the porch of her empty cottage, Ruth curled against her side, Samuel still asleep on the floor inside. She had packed what little they had into a bundle of blankets, a pot, and 2 dresses. There was no point in staying. The bank would come soon to claim what was left. Her eyes wandered the fields, the same fields she and her husband had once walked, dreaming of a life together. Every fence post, every row of earth seemed to echo with his voice. She pressed her hand to her lips, as if holding back a sob. Leaving this place felt like tearing her heart from her chest. By mid-morning, a shadow fell across the porch. Clara looked up to find Tall Elk standing there, broad-shouldered and silent. He carried something in his hand, a folded paper, bound with a strip of leather. "Come," he said simply. Too weary to argue, Clara followed. Ruth clutched her skirt as they walked, and Samuel, having woken, trailed behind with his jaw set in stubborn determination. They crossed the dirt road and stepped onto Tall Elk's land. The ranch stretched out wide before them, rolling pasture, a stream glittering under the sun, horses grazing at the far end. It was a place alive, unbroken by debt or despair. Tall Elk stopped near the center of the open field. He turned, his gaze steady on Clara. Without a word, he held out the folded paper. She frowned, hesitant. "What is this?" "Read," he said. Her fingers shook as she untied the strip of leather and opened the document. Her eyes darted over the ink, and at first she thought she had misread it. Then the truth struck her like a thunderclap. Deed of ownership. Transfer of land. From Tall Elk to Clara Miller. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the grass. The words blurred through her tears. "No," she whispered, clutching the paper to her chest. This can't be real." "It is," Tall Elk answered calmly. "This land is yours now." Clara stared up at him, her face streaked with tears, shaking her head furiously. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" "I can't accept something so impossible. I've already been called a burden, a beggar, a failure. If I take this, they'll say I used you. They will talk no matter what you do," Tall Elk interrupted, his voice deep, steady. "Let them. Their words cannot feed your children. Their judgment cannot give you shelter. But this land can." Samuel's eyes had gone wide. He snatched the paper from his mother's lap and held it up, his voice breaking with disbelief. "Mama, it's true. This says it belongs to you." Ruth clung tighter to Clara's arm, whispering, "We have a home again?" Clara's heart ached. She wanted to say yes, to embrace the miracle, but fear coiled in her chest. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "Tall Elk, this is everything you own. Your ranch, your future. Why give it to me?" For a moment, the strong Apache said nothing. He looked across the land, the horizon golden under the morning sun. When he spoke, his words were low, like a prayer. "I have walked this earth many years, Clara. I have fought, I have lost, I have endured. Land is nothing if it holds no life, no love. You have shown me a strength I had forgotten people carried. You rise when others call you broken. You care for your children when others call you weak. I will not let this world grind you into dust." Her throat tightened. His words cut through every cruel whisper she had endured, every stone of shame laid upon her. But still, she trembled. "I don't deserve this." Tall Elk knelt before her, his gaze locked on hers. "You deserve more than this. But this is what I can give." The silence stretched, broken only by the rustle of wind in the grass. Clara clutched the deed, her tears falling onto the paper. For the first time in years, she let herself believe not in survival, but in the possibility of living again. She rose slowly to her feet, the paper pressed against her chest. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you." Tall Elk inclined his head, saying nothing more. But his eyes softened, and in that look she felt something deeper than words. Respect, faith, and perhaps the beginning of something she had long thought lost. As they walked back toward the house together, Samuel skipped ahead, his laughter bright for the first time in months. Ruth sang to her doll, her small voice carrying on the breeze. And Clara, still trembling, felt the weight of despair begin to lift, replaced by something she could scarcely believe. Hope. The news spread faster than wildfire through the small town. The burdened widow now held the deed to Tall Elk's land. By the second morning, whispers followed Clara everywhere she went. She tricked him. "You know, no woman earns land like that. Poor man, he's been bewitched." Clara heard it all as she walked to the mercantile, her children at her side. The stairs cut sharper than knives, but something had changed inside her. She no longer bent her head beneath them. She held her chin high, the deed folded carefully in her apron pocket, and each step she took was steadier than the last. For years she had let the town's opinion define her. But Tall Elk's gift no, his trust had planted something within her heart that no whisper could uproot. This was not charity, she realized. It was a recognition of her worth, her resilience, her right to stand as tall as anyone else. When she returned to the ranch that evening, Clara set her children to gathering stones from the field. Together they built a fire ring, their hands blackened with earth, their laughter spilling into the twilight. For the first time in months, Clara caught herself smiling without force. The land seemed to breathe around them, alive, welcoming. The following week, townsfolk came to see if the rumors were true. They gathered at the fence line, muttering among themselves as Clara worked in the field, her sleeves rolled up, sweat dampening her brow. Samuel was carrying water buckets, and little Ruth followed, scattering feed for the chickens Tall Elk had gifted them. One woman, Mrs. Cartwright, called out with a sneer, "So it's true. You're mistress of this ranch now. Tell me, Clara, how did you manage such a miracle? Tears? Tricks?" The crowd chuckled. Clara straightened, her chest heaving from work, and for a moment the old shame flickered through her. But then she remembered Tall Elk's words, "You are not a burden. You stand." She walked to the fence, her gaze sweeping over the gathered faces. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "I did not earn this land through tricks," she said. "I earned it by surviving when none of you thought I could. By working when I had nothing left. By refusing to let my children starve when the world turned its back on us." The murmurs quieted. Some looked away. Others frowned, unwilling to admit her strength. Clara's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't falter. "Tall Elk saw what you refused to see, that even in my lowest hour I was not weak. I was not worthless. And if you cannot accept that, then so be it. This land is mine now, and I will build a life upon it." She turned back to her children before anyone could respond. Samuel's eyes gleamed with pride, and Ruth slipped her small hand into her mother's. Clara's heart swelled. In the months that followed, the ranch became more than a shelter, it became a home reborn. Clara learned to mend fences and tend livestock, her hands growing rough but capable. Samuel took to the fields with a determination that mirrored his father's, and Ruth filled the house with laughter, her songs drifting through the rooms as they cooked and sewed. Tall Elk remained near, guiding quietly when needed but never hovering. He showed Samuel how to break a horse without cruelty, how to respect the land that fed them. He taught Clara how to read the skies, to know when storms were coming, when to sow, when to harvest, but more than that, he gave them dignity. He never spoke of his gift again, never held it over her. He treated Clara not as a woman in debt to him, but as a partner in strength. Sometimes in the quiet of evening, Clara caught him watching the children play by the stream. His face would soften, and she would feel a stirring deep in her chest, a warmth she had thought buried forever. But she did not rush it. The land itself seemed to tell her, "Healing takes time." Winter came, harsh and bitter, yet their home did not crumble. They had firewood stacked, food stored, animals safe in the barn. For the first time since her husband's death, Clara faced the cold months without dread. On Christmas Eve, Samuel surprised her with a small carving he had whittled. Their cottage, set upon a hill with smoke curling from the chimney. Ruth presented her with a wreath of dried berries. Clara's heart brimmed with love so fierce it made her weep. They sat by the fire, and Clara whispered a prayer of thanks not only for survival, but for the gift of beginning anew. By spring, the townsfolk's whispers had changed. Where once they had mocked, now they muttered with uneasy respect. Some even offered help, though Clara knew it was not kindness that moved them but curiosity. Regardless, she accepted no pity. One afternoon, As she stood in the field watching the children chase each other through tall grass, Tall Elk approached. His shadow stretched beside hers, long under the afternoon sun. "You have made this place live again," he said quietly. Clara turned to him, the wind tugging strands of hair from her braid. "No," she replied. "We did. You gave me the land, but together we gave it life." For the first time in years, she felt the truth of her own words. She was no longer the woman bowed beneath debt and shame. She was the keeper of a home, the mother of thriving children, the mistress of land she could finally call hers. The burden was gone. In its place stood hope, strength, and a future as wid.